Welcome back. Today we're continuing the lore of the capital city, Lordaeron, exploring it in its transformed state, the Undercity, and how events throughout the many years and expansions have affected this city itself and those who call it home. Lordaeron, capital city, now referred to as the ruins of the Undercity, was once the thriving capital of the Forsaken, the undead faction of the Horde. It lay deep beneath the shattered remnants of the old human capital city of Lordaeron, hidden away in the shadowed depths of Terrasful Glades, at the northwest edge of the Lordaeron continent. Concealed beneath the surface, it stood as a dark, sinister stronghold, twisted and defiled by undeath, yet a home for those who had been cast away by life itself. Origins and Forsaken rule. Originally, the crypts beneath Lordaeron were nothing more than royal burial chambers, a resting place for the fallen kings and nobles. However, when Prince Arthas Menethil returned from Northrend, corrupted by Frostmourne, and under the sway of the Lich King, he sought to make these subterranean depths into a stronghold of the Scourge. The dark caverns of what would become the Undercity were meant to serve as a nerve center of the undead plague, a twisted capital from which the Scourge could spread its blight across the eastern kingdoms. However, before his vision could fully take shape, Arthas was forced to leave, called back to Northrend to defend the Lich King's domain. With Arthas gone, the balance of power shifted. Sylvanas Windrunner, once a High Elven Ranger general turned Banshee, led a rebellion against the Scourge. Freeing herself and countless others from the Lich King's will, she gathered the newly formed Forsaken and seized the abandoned remains of Arthas' stronghold beneath Lordaeron. What was once meant to be a bastion of Scourge control instead became the dark and foreboding heart of the Forsaken. Under Sylvanas' command, the Undercity was expanded and fortified. Its labyrinth tunnels deepened and reinforced into an almost impenetrable fortress. The Forsaken dredged vast catacombs, dungeons, and laboratories, shaping the Undercity into a twisted necromancy nightmare of decay, death, and experimentation. The city's structure and defenses. Unlike the grand and ordinarily human cities of Azeroth, the Undercity was a place of shadows, gloom, and eerie green light. Rivers of poisonous slime coursed through its channels, and grotesque architecture reflected the necromantic horrors that lurked within. A sprawling maze of interconnected tunnels, spiraling stairways, and hidden chambers made navigation treacherous for outsiders. The city itself was divided into different quarters, each dedicated to specific functions of the Forsaken Society. Apothecaries conducted vile experiments in the Apothecarium, warriors trained in the War Quarter, and traders and smugglers operated in the Rogues Quarter. Defensively, the Undercity was nearly impervious to a traditional siege. Its entrance was well hidden and heavily fortified, accessible only through secret routes or the ruins of Lordaeron's throne room above. Any invading force would find themselves funneled through tight, defensible corridors where Forsaken forces could strike from the shadows. The city's necromantic energies and resident undead ensured that even in death, its defenders could rise again to continue the fight. The battle for the Undercity. While the combined forces of the Horde and the Alliance waged war against the Lich King's armies at Angrathar, the Wrathgate in Northrend, a treacherous uprising erupted deep within the Forsaken capital of the Undercity. The chaos was orchestrated by the Dreadlord Varamathras and Grand Apothecary Putris, both of whom betrayed the Forsaken and sought to seize control of the Undercity for their own sinister purposes. This insurrection was backed by the Burning Legion, revealing that Varamathras had been serving his demonic masters all along, and that Putris had harbored his own ambitions to turn the Forsaken into a force of terror through the use of plague warfare. The betrayal at Wrathgate and the fall of the Undercity. Prior to the uprising, Putris and his apothecaries had been tasked with creating new strains of plague that could be used against the Lich King's forces. However, Putris betrayed both the Horde and the Forsaken when he unleashed his deadly plague upon the battlefield at the Wrathgate indiscriminately, killing not only the Scourge, but also Alliance and Horde soldiers alike. including the Orcish High Overlord Dranosh Sarfang, and many of the Alliance's finest warriors. This act of treachery not only devastated both factions, but also ignited outrage among the leaders of the Horde and the Alliance. With the Forsaken capital left vulnerable, Varimathras and his demonic allies launched a coup from within, attacking the Forsaken and driving Sylvanas Windrunner from her own throne. The Undercity was overrun with demons and rebel Forsaken loyal to Putris, and Sylvanas herself barely escaped with her life. The Dark Lady fled to Orgrimmar, where she sought the aid of Warchief Thrall to reclaim her city. The Horde's retaliation. Determined to crush the rebellion and restore order, Thrall personally led a force of the Horde's champions, Orcish Kor'kron, and Forsaken loyalists through the front entrance of the Undercity. Alongside him, Sylvanas Windrunner returned to retake her capital and enact vengeance upon the traitors who had sought to usurp her rule. The Horde forces fought their way through the twisted corridors of the Undercity, battling rebel Forsaken, demons, and abominations corrupted by the Legion's influence. Eventually they confronted Varimathras, who taunted Thrall and Sylvanas before engaging them in battle. However, during the fight, the Dreadlord was seemingly overwhelmed by his own Dark Masters, who punished him for his failures. He was ultimately slain in the ensuing conflict, marking the end of his long and two-faced schemes. The Alliance's assault. While the Horde stormed the Undercity from the main gates, King Varian Rin and Lady Jaina Proudmoore led an Alliance force through the city's sewer system, determined to reclaim Lordaeron for the Alliance. Upon entering the Undercity, they encountered the treacherous Putris and his apothecaries, who had turned the city's necrotic horrors into weapons against all life. The Alliance engaged in a brutal fight against Putris and his rebels, ultimately killing the mad scientist and ending his reign of terror. With both leaders of the coup, Varimathras and Putris, defeated, the uprising was crushed and the Undercity was returned to Forsaken control. However, tensions between the Horde and the Alliance reached a breaking point. Upon encountering Thrall in the throne room of the ruined Undercity, King Varian Wren, enraged by the betrayal at Wrathgate and the atrocities committed by the Forsaken, vowed that there would be no peace between the factions. He accused the entire Horde of being complicit in Putris' treachery and prepared for battle, but Jaina intervened, teleporting the Alliance forces away before war could erupt within the Undercity. Aftermath and the Kor'kron occupation. In the wake of battle, Thrall took drastic measures to prevent such treachery from ever occurring again. With Varimathras gone and the Forsaken's leadership called into question, he stationed a legion of Kor'kron Guard within the Undercity, led by Captain Bragor Bloodfist. These Orcish enforcers replaced the Undercity Guardians and took control of the Forsaken capital, ensuring that Sylvanas and her followers remained under close scrutiny. This occupation deeply strained relationships between the Forsaken and the rest of the Horde, as many of the undead were irritated about being under the rule of Orcish overseers who did not trust them. Despite the Kor'kron's presence, remnants of the battle remained scattered throughout the Undercity, with some former Guardians still lurking in the sewers, their continued presence unexplained. Whether this was an oversight or a deeper mystery remains unknown. This event marked a major turning point for the Forsaken, cementing their precarious position within the Horde and foreshadowing the growing tensions between Sylvanas and the rest of Azeroth's factions. The battle for the Undercity was not just a civil war. It was a prelude to greater conflicts yet to come. The Nightmare's descent upon the Undercity. Following the death of Arthas Menethil, the Lich King who had once bound the Forsaken to his will, many in Azeroth believed that the horrors of undeath and corruption would subside. However, as the world reeled from the fall of the Scourge, a far more insidious and eldritch force descended upon the Forsaken capital. The Emerald Nightmare, a malevolent corruption that had seeped from the Emerald Dream and twisted reality in itself, found its way into the dark depths of the Undercity. The Enveloping Nightmare. It began as a subtle shift in the air, thick, unnatural mists creeping through the tunnels and corridors. seeping into every crevice of the Forsaken stronghold. Unlike the green toxic fumes of the Forsaken's own blight, this mist was darker, tainted with eerie, otherworldly shadows that seemed to whisper as they spread. It coiled around the ruins of Lordaeron and slithered into the depths below, where it took root in the Undercity itself. At first, it seemed as though the unnatural fog was nothing more than an ominous omen, but soon its true power was revealed. Sylvanas Windrunner, along with half of the Forsaken and Horde representatives within the city, began experiencing horrifying nightmares, visions so vivid and twisted they felt real. The Dark Lady herself, always a figure of unwavering control, was seen murmuring in her sleep, tormented by images of a fate worse than undeath. The Forsaken who remained unaffected, among them Charlindra, one of Sylvanas' loyalists, watched in alarm as their queen seemed to struggle against an invisible force. Then, the nightmare took form. Shadowy warriors, phantasmal figures seemingly born from the mist, began to manifest throughout the Undercity. These creatures were nightmarish echoes of long-forgotten souls, twisted into horrifying shapes by the Emerald Nightmare's influence. They attacked without warning, descending upon Charlindra and her followers, cutting them down with claws and weapons that seemed to sap the very essence from their victims. As the screams of the fallen echoed throughout the cavernous halls, the nightmare spread further, twisting the Undercity into a surreal and terrifying landscape. Walls and corridors shifted, creating labyrinth paths where none existed before. Pools of green Forsaken blight turned black, reflecting grotesque and impossible visions of those who looked into them. The very air became heavy with despair, as if the city itself was alive and breathing, feeding on the fears of its inhabitants. Sylvanas' nightmare. While the Forsaken and Horde warriors battled against the encroaching nightmare, Sylvanas remained trapped within her own tormented visions. In her nightmare, she saw herself chained in ice, forced to kneel before an unforeseen figure that loomed over her like a monstrous shadow. The claws burned with a searing pain unlike anything she had ever known. Not the cold embrace of undeath, but something deeper, more final. From the darkness, familiar voices whispered,
"You will serve him as you always have. You are not free, Dark Lady. You are nothing without his will."
Before her, a reflection of herself wearing a frozen crown, her banshee wail now a sorrowful moan rather than a battle cry. The nightmare showed her the horrifying possibility that she had never truly broken free. That everything she had fought for, every battle, every soul claim for the Forsaken, had been a carefully crafted illusion of choice. In that moment, something within her snapped. With sheer willpower and fury, Sylvanas fought back against the nightmare's hold. She unleashed a piercing banshee scream, its raw power shattering the illusion and forcing her back into reality. However, upon awakening, she found herself standing in the throne room of Undercity, not as she had left it, but as it had become, a battlefield consumed by shadows. The struggle against the nightmare. With Sylvanas free from the nightmare's grip, she took command of the remaining unaffected Forsaken and Horde warriors, and launched an assault to purge the invaders from her city. The battle raged through the catacombs and halls of Undercity as shadowy warriors clashed with undead and Horde defenders. The nightmare, however, was not merely a force of darkness, but a corruption of the mind and soul. Even those who resisted its initial influence found themselves assailed by doubt, fear, and visions of their own failures and regrets. Forsaken warriors who had long embraced their unliving state were confronted by nightmares of who they had been in life. Visions of loved ones who cursed them as abominations, of a warmth they could never feel again. Horde warriors were forced to relive their deepest shames and betrayals, with some turning their weapons upon themselves in agony. Sylvanas, however, was relentless. She led her forces to strike at the heart of the nightmare's corruption, using their own banshee powers to disrupt the shadowy figures and shatter the illusion magic that had turned Undercity into a wakened nightmare. The battle lasted for hours, with entire sections of the city collapsing under the weight of reality shifting between waken and dream. Finally, after a last stand in the apothecarium, the nightmare began to dissipate. The shadowy figures faded, the unnatural mist receded, and the Forsaken, who had succumbed to their nightmares, were left shaken but alive, at least as alive as the undead could be. Aftermath and lasting scars. Though the Undercity was reclaimed, the experience left deep scars upon the Forsaken. Many of those whom had succumbed to the nightmare never fully recovered, their minds permanently fractured by the horrors they had witnessed. Some were driven to madness, whispering constantly about the visions they had seen. Others, shaken to their core, began to question their very existence, doubting whether undeath had ever truly freed them from the chains of fate. Sylvanas herself, despite emerging victorious, was deeply disturbed by the visions she had endured. Though she never spoke of what she had seen, her demeanor grew colder, more distant, as if the nightmare had revealed something she dared not acknowledge. The origins of the attack remained a mystery. The Emerald Nightmare had long been associated with corruption of the Green Dragonflight and the Old Gods, yet why it had specifically targeted the Undercity was unclear. Some whispered that the nightmares had been drawn to Sylvanas' own doubts, feeding upon her fears and the lingering remnants of her past servitude to Arthas. Others feared that the attack was merely a prelude to something far worse, a sign that even in undeath, the Forsaken were not immune to forces beyond their comprehension. Despite the Forsaken's victory, one truth remained evident. The nightmare had left its mark, and the echoes of its horrors would never truly fade from the Undercity's depths. Cataclysm. As the Cataclysm was about to begin, the Undercity felt massive quakes ripple through its darkened corridors. The ancient stone foundations groaned under the immense pressure, and the air itself seemed to tremble with the weight of the coming disaster. The once sturdy walls of the fallen kingdom's underbelly cracked and splintered, dust rising from the floor in eerie clouds. Shadows danced wildly in the dimly lit halls as the very ground beneath the Forsaken city shifted and groaned in agony. In the lower depths of the Undercity, the rumbling was deafening, as if the very earth itself was protesting the corruption and decay that had taken root within. The sound of collapsing rubble echoed throughout the labyrinth passages, adding to the chaos. The city's dark denizens, the Forsaken, scrambled to secure their holdings, their eyes wide with panic, knowing that something far worse than mere tremors was coming. Above, the surface world was already beginning to unravel, with the skies torn apart by the might of the Cataclysm. But within the depths of Lordaeron's ruins, those who were brave enough to venture through the shaken halls could feel the shifting in the air. The Undercity itself was being torn between life and death, a fate sealed by those very forces of nature that would forever alter the fate of Azeroth. And as the quakes continued, there was no escaping the ominous truth. The Undercity would not remain unscathed. The Cataclysm was only the beginning, and the Forsaken would soon learn just how fragile even the deepest dark corners of their kingdom truly were. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment down below. Content comes out regularly with lore videos on Sunday, and World of Warcraft Protection Paladin content coming soon on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays.